Hillsdale College refuses to surrender to the Black Lives Matter crowd. Amazing what can happen when grown men act like adults instead of craven panderers. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start in Michigan at the campus of Hillsdale College, where the college is one of the few refusing to appease Black Lives Matter by condemning all police and supporting the notion that every white American is racist. And good on Hillsdale. Katie's going to help explain the story. We also have a letter, a really moving letter that was written by an alumna of Hillsdale, African-American woman, young woman, who defended Hillsdale from the cheap attacks. And I think that's what's frustrating about this. You would expect liberals outside of Hillsdale, progressives who would never send their kids to Hillsdale because it sends the wrong message. A message about academic merit and message about American exceptionalism. Though you would think that's where the protests against Hillsdale were coming from, but they're not. These are recent graduates of Hillsdale who are trying to drag Hillsdale to the left. It's kind of shameful.
So basically, some of the college's alumni actually pushed for Hillsdale to make some sort of a statement because basically, they're saying, just like everyone's saying, if you don't make a statement, silence is violence. So they said, hey, please, they started a petition and they were getting, a lot of people signing it. And they said, please, college, respond. So the college responded with this open letter. The college is pressed to speak. It is told that saying what it always has said is insufficient. Instead, it must decry racism and the mistreatment of Black Americans in particular. This, however, is precisely what the college has always said.
And that's the irony, right? I mean, Hillsdale, this is the thing. If people would just step back and look at this with a careful, critical, historical eye, you will find that it was the Republicans who were behind the civil rights movement. It was Democrats who were all Civil War and post-Civil War KKK people. It was the Democrats in the 1960s who actually opposed civil rights. Mm-hmm. That if you look at the history of legislation over the last 70 years, you will find that Republicans have been on the right side of positive measures to improve the lives of Black people. And all the left can say about that is snark, well, things have flipped now, right? Even though the Republicans did those things, they were really the Democrats. And the Democrats who were all the racists, well, they're really the Republicans now. That's what a get-out-of-jail-free card. No historical argument, no facts, just, well, the shoe's on the other foot now. The Republicans have become the Ku Klux Klansmen, and the Democrats have become the lovers of African Americans. And then explain to me this. Why is it that former Senator Byrd of West Virginia,
Robert Byrd,
who was a Kleagle? Was he a Kleagle?
I don't know.
In the Ku Klux Klan?
I don't know.
He was a high-ranking Senator Robert Byrd, long-serving Democrat Robert Byrd, who is a former actual ranking officer in the Ku Klux Klan.
Nancy Pelosi's good friend.
Still has buildings named after him in his home state.
That's right.
The Democrat. So what we're getting here is Hillsdale's right. From the very beginning, from Hillsdale's foundation in the 19th century, they have been committed to the civil rights of all Americans, to the free ability of all Americans, including African Americans, to participate fully and without prejudice in the opportunities of America. Hillsdale has been one of those colleges that has from the very beginning done this. And so now I love the response. When these idiot kids who don't know their history start carping about this, they simply say, take a look at our charter.
Well, what saddens me, though, is the fact that if they're alums of Hillsdale, they clearly didn't take their history course
or they allowed something happened to them after they left campus.
It's true. And just so everyone knows, Hillsdale was actually founded by abolitionists in 1844. They pledged to educate, as you said, all students, and it didn't matter of their nation, their color, or their sex. There were women there. There were African Americans there. Hot dang, go Hillsdale, Michigan. But we have at least one student from Hillsdale who actually knows what the heck is going on and is, an intellectual. So she decided to write a letter. So the letter is actually written by the alumna Tory Hope Peterson, and she writes, Dear Hillsdale College, I was one of your token Black students. The essays I wrote on my admissions application spoke about my newly found faith in Christ, experiences as a former foster youth, and adversities faced while growing up with a mentally ill mother. Though my ACT score was not, not only below average, but way below the national average, you accepted me anyways. While other prestigious colleges might have seen me as a high-risk statistic, you saw me as an individual with human dignity. I look at my acceptance letter and diploma as symbols of the institution seeking justice and equality for those who represent me, and that is former foster youth, underprivileged, undereducated, pregnant student, white, black, woman, and person.
And of course, she used the word token in her opening sentences with big sarcastic scare quotes. And so once again, what you often find with the American people, whatever institutional hurdles there are that have not yet been completely managed by the system, by the ongoing progression of our wonderful Constitution and its promises to people. Again, the reason we are much different than we were in 1980 and a much different country than we were in 1950 and a much different country than we were in 1865 is because that however flawed our founding fathers were as individuals, they produced a document that guaranteed and mandated that as time unfolded, that more and more liberty and more equality would have to be what the law prescribed, that it has done that. And you have a young woman here who is good for her, right? I'm sure she's risking some blowback from her own community. She's part African American and part Caucasian. So I suppose there will be those out there who will dismiss her as not being authentically black, which is ironic because they did exactly the same opposite with Barack Obama, who threw his white mother under a bus and was and is treated as if he were simply only an African American. See how these things work completely selectively. Good for her, starting off on her career as a young woman by defending the university that gave her an opportunity when many others would not.
And I just want to end with her ending statement in that letter because I think it speaks volumes. She says, I have never viewed Hillsdale College as silent. I still yearn to practice a virtue the college taught me and displayed in the midst of the most recent racial turmoil. Prudence. Hillsdale College doesn't have to be loud with their words because they're bold in their actions and consistent in their education as they whisper justice. All right, on to the next story. We're going to actually go across the pond to Oxford. We have Nigel Bigr. He's a Regius Professor of Moral and Pastoral Theology at Oxford, and he is now claiming that younger conservative professors are not willing to stand up to the mob, which we know. He's an older professor, and he's saying, yo, youngins, let's do this. He has criticized the renewed demands that have been prompted by the Black Lives Matter movement about, statues, memorials, all that stuff needed, to be taken down, and social justice and all that. And he has said of professors, what they do know is that it's not fashionable to stand up for the British Empire, and they also get the impression that if you dare to that, like me, you get mobbed. So back in 2017, he actually was almost canceled himself because of what's happening in Britain with the morally mixed history, as it's being said, and how it could be a source of pride as well as shame. So he's trying to address the history as history, and of course he almost got canceled, and now he's saying that basically you're not getting any younger professors standing up.
Well, as somebody who's gone through this myself,
Many a time.
I've taught at 7 different universities. I have been drummed out of some. I've had to sue others. I've left in questionable circumstances from still yet others. The fact is that when you don't have tenure, like the younger faculty don't, it's really difficult for them. They can't really fire this guy. He is a long-serving, he's a Regius Professor, which means not only is he a professor, he is a professor with a really sweet chair of endowment, right? This is one of your big guys. They're not getting, they might be able to force him to retire at some point, but they're not firing him unless he actually says something really bad. According to the left. But these young professors, see, I was never that way. I mean, and so I don't know what to say. I mean, I could never, to the surprise of nobody, I could never keep my mouth shut. So at every place I've been, I've run afoul of the pieties of campuses because I'm going to say what I want to say. And the thing that always made me mad is that what I said, I could prove. The things that I said that upset people, there were statistics, facts. There was data to prove that if not completely correct, that my positions were completely defensible. But that doesn't matter to this rabble. So on the one hand, I'm actually a little encouraged. If there are actually young conservative professors at Oxford,
what?
I would have guessed there weren't many. Mr. Bigr seems to suggest they're there. I guess what I would say to them, all right, if you're keeping your powder dry till you get tenure, we better hear from you when you get it. And once you're free of the tenure boundary, then you better start speaking up. I don't expect you to follow the the ruined minefield blast career chances that I took, where you get kind of bounced out of one place or another. But once you get tenure, you have a protection, and you have a moral obligation to defend those things, because he's right. Bigr is right. You can look at all of these circumstances, all of the stuff that the left is reacting to, all of these people that are being torn down. You can look at them through two lenses. Do you look at Thomas Jefferson just because of his private life, or do you look at him as having created a document that gave rise to any and all the freedoms that African Americans have today? To only look at one is cruel and malign. It is anti-historical, and it is typical of the left. You can look the same way we consider Martin Luther King. Now, with Martin Luther King, those same people who are tearing down Jefferson and Washington, under no circumstances will they allow you to criticize King. Criticism of King is itself racist. And yet, here's a guy who plagiarized. Here's a guy who was a serial philanderer on his wife. Here's a guy, according to the most recent information, seems to suggest that people close to him engaged in rape parties, that if he did not participate in himself, he was certainly aware of them. That should be enough to hashtag Me Too, you shouldn't it? Bring down the statue of MLK. Now, I don't think that's necessary. I think MLK was a great man. He was a great man who did great things and yet had personal flaws. Jefferson was a great man who did great things and had personal flaws. George Washington was a super great man who did super great things and yet had human flaws. The left is clever in attacking only right-wing or traditionalist statues on the basis of this, while protecting their own radical statues from this. Again, when you get back to me when you start throwing opprobrium on the memory of Margaret Sanger, get back to me when you're willing to go after that eugenicist, because if you're not, then you're nothing but hypocrites.
Well, there's so much to go off of for that. But in regards to what Nigel is saying, too, we have this left-wing, like this zealous left-wing minority of academics. He says minority of academics. I think it's a majority at this point. A zealous left-wing majority of academics who are trying to basically take over everything. And I don't know if you would say we're allowing it, but at this point, it's infiltrated everything. It's infested everything. So how is it that these young academics, even if there are a few conservatives, what is it that they can even do? Like you said, keep their powder dry, just keep quiet until they get tenure?
To me, the mystification of this story remains the facts that there are young conservative professors at Oxford. They must have no internet profile. These poor young bastards must have never, ever, ever used Twitter, never, ever expressed anything about their political worldview on Facebook, because if they did, they wouldn't be here.
Well, since we were on the topic of a founding father, let's talk about maybe the one founding father that people used to actually know. The first president of the United States, George Washington, and obviously he must be canceled too. Everyone's getting canceled. Well, a Nashville prep school has now canceled poor GW because it's not consistent or relevant to the way that we teach history today.
Let me repeat that. We used to have a celebration day for George Washington.
Yes.
We are not doing that, and the implication is we're not going to spend much time talking about George Washington because that's not the way we teach history today. Correction. That's not the way you teach cultural studies today. You're not teaching history.
So this Nashville prep school is Harpeth Hall, and it's led by Jess Hill, who would not actually answer any specific questions about why they were deciding to cancel. They had an annual George Washington celebration. But of course, she sent a statement that said, after much thoughtful dialogue spanning several years, Harpeth Hall has decided to discontinue the annual George Washington celebration. The following reasons. Number one, it is not consistent with or relevant to the way that we teach history today.
Can we address these one at a time?
Okay, fine. Number one.
We have to. I'll let you, they've heard me on history, you give it to them. Take that first one down.
It's not consistent with or relevant to the way that we teach history today. They do not teach history anymore. If you would just read what George Washington did, you could then have the students understand that he did some good things, he did some bad things, but we understand the good things overshadow the bad things. But we do not teach history, so of course it can't be consistent with or relevant to.
Please stop calling it history.
It's not
history.
history.
You are not teaching your kids history. You're teaching your kids cultural appropriation. You're teaching your kids, for lack of a better word, Black Lives Matter you've hijacked history with that rhetoric and dialogue. And it started before Black Lives Matter with Howard Zinn and his stupid socialist history of America, which you take as gospel.
Number two, it does not demonstrate the significant role that women, people of color, and other underrepresented groups play in our nation's history.
So, to take your kid to see Santa Claus at Christmas must end because Santa Claus does not represent the role that women, elves, and other non-humans played in the creation of those toys.
Yes.
To honor George Washington, see, it's when you honor George Washington, you're not honoring women.
Clearly.
You see?
You
and
can't
that's
have
why
both.
you can't
one
do it.
or the other.
Right, because we don't teach history. We teach agitprop and left-wing dialectic. And so because teaching about George Washington doesn't teach about women. And so therefore we can't teach about George Washington.
So you have history, which includes only white men.
Yep.
Only.
Which we don't
there was
teach
nothing.
anymore.
We don't teach any of that. So we have agitprop, and then that's where
Let's
you
call it herstory.
herstory. No, because
or
it has to
elfstory
be
if we're talking about Santa Claus.
It would if it's herstory though, you're still leaving out people of color. So is it
Blurstory.
Pockistry? Her pockistry. It sounds like a country. Her Pakistan.
Afro-herstory. I'm a major in Afro-herstory. Now, again, the fact that teaching Afro-history, only historical events that deal with women who happen, and they'd have to be queer.
Of course.
Afro-queer person. Afro-queerstory.
Afro-queerstory.
That's history to these people. Afro-queerstory.
Plus. Just put a plus at the
Plus TBQ.
All right.
Afro-queerstory.
Number 3, as to why George Washington celebration must be canceled. A growing number of students, faculty, staff, and alumni are expressing their discomfort with this tradition.
See, we're back to that.
See number 1 and 2. Like,
because
that's
there's somebody out there who's uncomfortable with what actually happened. See, this is the problem with history. History is one of those things that people are uncomfortable with. Hey, guess what? George Washington had to kill a lot of British to liberate this country. I'm uncomfortable with guns. Guns make me queasy. Well, then we got to stop teaching about the revolution, don't we?
Well, of course. I mean, it makes sense. Here's the deal. Harpeth Hall is
Hall.
an elite, all-women prep
course
middle
it is.
school and high school. That's where we missed it. And according to their website, some of their awesome alumni include Reese Witherspoon, singer Amy Grant, an entertainer named Sarah Colley Cannon, who I've never heard of.
And Minnie Pearl.
Oh, it's Minnie Pearl. Oh, she's known as Minnie Pearl. That's why I haven't known. It's Minnie Pearl.
That's a brain trust right there.
Minnie Pearl.
When you see those kind of
Good old
illustrious
Minnie
graduates,
Pearl.
I mean, my God.
It is Nashville.
You mean RuPaul didn't graduate from there? Who's that idiot Australian? Rebel Wilson didn't graduate from this intellectual mecca of femininity? And I love the fact that they refer to their middle school students as women. I guess we should be pleased that they don't spell it with a Y. So again,
an X.
the churning out here. Mm-hmm. How long has this been around? It's been around probably 50, 60, 70 years.
No.
They're churning out Reese Witherspoons, Amy Grants, and Minnie Pearls.
And you only have to pay $29,000 a year. That's all.
With that kind of historical achievement by women, no wonder we've gotten rid of history here. This is what we should be studying: the cultural and historical significance of Reese Witherspoon.
It's time for some real education. The Farnese Hercules, a massive marble statue, a copy of a lost original version that was cast in bronze through a method called lost wax casting. It depicts a powerful but exhausted Hercules leaning on his club, which is covered by the hide of the Nemean lion. In myths about Hercules, killing the lion was the first of his 12 famous labors. The statue depicts the hero just after he carried out his final labor, which is suggested by the apples of the Hesperides he holds behind his back.
And take a look at this beautiful statue. I mean, this is, again, as Katie pointed out, we have here a statue that has a lot of history for Western culture. You may remember a couple months ago we did the statue of Laocoon, which was discovered in the Renaissance and helped push this revival of the classics again. One of the things that happened in that period in Western culture between about 1250 and 1650, the so-called Renaissance, is when Greek and Roman ideals were being rediscovered. They were digging, and archaeology had begun. They were digging up statues like this one. And so the Farnese Hercules is an ancient statue of Hercules. It is probably, as Katie pointed out, an enlarged copy made in the early 3rd century AD, signed by a sculptor named Glycon, who is otherwise unknown. Like many other ancient Roman sculptures, it is a copy or version of a much older Greek statue. So this is not an original Roman statue. It is an ancient Greek statue, probably lost, possibly set in brass or bronze, that has been carved in marble here. And so notice the arc of Western culture. You go back to the Greeks. You start in the Renaissance, where this was discovered. You go back to the Romans, right, of which this particular variant occurred. And to understand where that came from, you got to go back to the Greeks, and all along the way, the Judeo-Christian values of the Renaissance gave rise to an interest in the classical modeling of statues and bodies. We've discussed already on the Instant Classic how the study of anatomy, the study of human dissection, got rolling again in the Renaissance, really for the first time in world history, got rolling in earnest. And so take a look at the physique of Hercules, right? And this is whatever else this is, besides a statement of strength and power. This is also an exercise in anatomy. And if you look at the way he leans, that muscular arm leans on the carcass of the Nemean lion that is actually stretched over his club. That big rock at the bottom on the right, that's the tip of his club. And a large pole goes through it. That's what he would wield to destroy things. You think Thor's hammer was a heavy thing, but then the cloak of the Nemean lion, that was the first of his 12 labors, to kill this vicious, oversized lion, which he did. And there you have the cloak over. And if you go to the back picture, there you see the golden apples of the Hesperides. That was his final labor. So in this picture, you see the very first labor, and it's the fruits, if I may use that pun, of that first labor, the pelt of the Nemean lion. And here behind him, you have the golden apples of the Hesperides. This was the 12th labor, where Hercules was sent into the dangerous garden of the Hesperides on the other side of the world to find these apples made of gold and to retrieve them. And you can see there, this is the marriage of anatomical understanding and artistic achievement. The muscularity of what you're seeing there, the backside of this man is formidable, and you can see how big he is by how small those apples, those golden apples, actually look like ping pong balls in his hands. And if you go back around to the front, you see there the beginning and the end, right? So the hand and the arm behind his back that hold the apples, right? His labors are now behind him. And leaning on that club there, you do have the suggestion of where it all started. And you can see the weariness. And this is the interesting thing. When he went to the Garden of the Hesperides, only Atlas, the Titan, could retrieve them. He couldn't. So what Hercules actually did, according to Greek mythology, is he took from Atlas the entire world. Atlas, you may recall, was the Titan who carried the world on his shoulders for eternity. Hercules took the world on his own shoulders so Atlas could go and retrieve those apples. To get a sense of how that statue imposed itself upon Renaissance thinking, take a look at this image. This is from 1592. The artist is Hendrik Goltzius, and it gives you a sense of, in drawing and perspective, how really important this became as a model. You see the entire massive man from behind. You see the sketch made. This is the kind of thing that young artists would do. They'd go to Rome, they would see these works of art, they would sketch them, they'd bring them back to their Dutch places where they were born, or the countries that they came from, Germany, Deutschland, Denmark, wherever they had come from, to study from the masters in Rome, and then to bring that new sense of the classical revival back to their own cities.
As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Now, as a reminder, Freedom Project Academy's live online school is enrolling new students for just 3 more weeks. You have only 3 weeks to get your students into Freedom Project Academy. Request your free packet at freedomforschool.com. That's freedom, F-O-R, school.com. Now let's wrap things up with our fun fact of the day. A higher percentage of Hillsdale students actually enlisted during the Civil War than from any other Western college. Of the more than 400 who fought for the Union, 4 of them earned the Congressional Medal of Honor, 3 became generals, and many more served as regimental commanders. 60 of them also gave their lives.
In other words, they don't just practice it, they preached it. And isn't it interesting to think that back in the 19th century, Michigan was considered the West? And that's our show for today. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated.